A billionaire CEO walks into her own luxury car dealership and gets turned away, but not because she can't afford it, because of the color of her skin. What happens next? She fights back and shakes an entire industry to its core. Betrayal, revenge, and a battle for justice. This is the story of Elena Martinez, and how one moment of discrimination turned into a war that would change everything. Before we dive in, let us know what time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Elena Martinez sat in her office, the vast skyline of New York stretching beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city never slept, but for Elena, it had always been more than just a symbol of opportunity. It was a battlefield. As the CEO of Martinez Motors, a luxury car brand she had built from the ground up, Elena had broken barriers. A black woman in a space dominated by legacy names and old traditions, she had earned her place not through inheritance, but through grit, intelligence, and an unwavering belief that everyone, regardless of their background, deserved a seat at the table. Yet, the reality of the world was never that simple. A letter lay open on her mahogany desk, the words burning into her mind. Dear Martinez Motors, I visited your Beverly Hills showroom last week, excited to purchase one of your vehicles. As a longtime admirer of your brand, I was prepared to invest in a car that represents the pinnacle of craftsmanship and performance. However, my experience was far from what I expected. Despite my financial readiness, I was treated with indifference, even suspicion. The salespeople barely acknowledged me. And when they finally did, I was subtly steered away from the higher-end models. Meanwhile, a white customer, dressed no differently than I was offered test drives and a full presentation of options. It pains me to write this, because I believe Martinez Motors would be different. I believed it stood for something greater. If this is how you allow customers to be treated, then perhaps I was wrong. Sincerely, David Williams. Her company had been built on the foundation of equality, prestige, and accessibility to all who could afford luxury, regardless of race or background. She had personally instilled that vision into every facet of the brand. Yet, if the behavior described in this letter was accurate, it meant that somewhere along the chain, that principle was being ignored. She reached for her phone and dialed a number. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Elena, what's going on? It was Daniel Harper, her trusted assistant. He had been with her long enough to read between the lines. I need you to book me a flight to Los Angeles, she said, leaning back in her chair. First thing tomorrow morning. There was a pause on the other end. Are we talking business or personal? Both, she interrupted. And I need this to stay quiet. No official announcements, no corporate bookings. Just a simple, personal trip. Another pause. Understood. Where exactly are you headed? Beverly Hills, she said. I need to see something for myself. Daniel didn't ask further. That was one of the reasons she trusted him. After ending the call, Elena closed the letter and set it aside. There was no turning back now. Her eyes wandered to the framed photograph on the shelf, a younger version of herself, standing in front of her very first factory. She remembered what it had taken to get here. The battles, the victories, the silent, endless war of proving herself in an industry that had never made room for people like her. And now, she had to prove herself again, not as a CEO, but as a customer. As she boarded the plane the next morning, she settled into her seat and gazed out of the window. The city blurred below as the aircraft ascended into the sky. Elena stepped out of the black SUV she had rented at LAX, adjusting the strap of her leather crossbody bag as she took in her surroundings. Beverly Hills was a place of curated perfection. Towering palm trees, sleek storefronts, and streets lined with luxury vehicles that looked as if they had never been touched by a single speck of dust. Dressed in a crisp white button-down, dark jeans, and a pair of clean sneakers, she blended into the city's casual affluence. She had deliberately chosen an outfit that exuded neither wealth nor struggle, something neutral, unassuming. No designer handbag, no jewelry that would signal status. Today, she was not Elena Martinez, the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar automotive empire. She was simply a potential customer, a woman walking into a luxury car dealership to see what kind of service she would receive. as she approached the Martinez Motors showroom. Its sleek glass exterior reflected the golden Californian sun. Inside, cars with more than most homes were displayed like pieces of fine art, flawless, gleaming, untouchable. Elena pulled open the heavy glass door and stepped inside. The cool, climate-controlled air hit her immediately, carrying the subtle scent of polished leather and fresh espresso. A handful of employees were stationed around the showroom, all dressed in impeccably tailored suits. Their conversations with customers were polished, filled with a kind of effortless charm that catered to the ultra-wealthy. She glanced around, not a single face that looked like hers. She took a slow breath, then made her way toward the reception desk, where a well-dressed woman with a practiced smile greeted her. "Welcome to Martinez Motors. How can I assist you today?" Elena returned the smile. "I'd like to take a look at the Bugatti Chiron Supersport." The receptionist hesitated. Just for a fraction of a second. It was subtle, but Elena noticed. A brief glance at her outfit, a flicker of doubt, before she quickly recovered. "Of course. Let me check with our sales team." She stepped away, leaving Elena waiting. From the corner of her eye, Elena caught a tall man in a navy suit approaching, a strong, confident stride, a sharp jawline, salt and pepper hair neatly combed back. Even before he spoke, she knew who he was. Richard Langford. She had read his file before, showroom manager for Beverly Hills. A man with an impeccable track record of high-end sales, but someone whose business strategies had raised questions in the past. If anyone was responsible for fostering an environment of exclusivity, it was him. "Ma'am." Richard greeted her smoothly, though his expression was more analytical than welcoming. "I understand you're interested in the Bugatti Chiron Supersport." Elena nodded. "That's right." He gave her a long, deliberate once-over, not the kind of look that assessed a customer's needs, but one that sized up whether she belonged here at all. "Do you have an appointment?" he asked. Elena raised a brow. "I wasn't aware that was necessary." Richard smiled, but there was no warmth behind it. "For certain models, we typically schedule private viewings. These cars are highly exclusive." Elena kept her expression neutral. "I understand, but I'd still like to see it." Richard hesitated again, then gestured toward one of his younger employees, a junior salesperson who couldn't have been more than 25. He leaned in slightly, whispering something to him. The young man nodded, then turned toward Elena with an uncomfortable expression. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the young salesman said, "but at the moment, we don't have that model available for viewing." Elena glanced past him, just behind a glass partition. The Bugatti Chiron Supersport was parked under showroom lights, flawless and untouched. "That's interesting," she said, tilting her head slightly, "because it looks like it's right there." Richard's smile barely faltered. "It's currently reserved for a client." Elena held his gaze. "Then I assume that policy applies to all walk-ins." "Of course," Richard said smoothly. Before Elena could respond, the glass doors opened and a well-dressed couple entered, an older white man in a tailored suit, his wife draped in diamonds. Within seconds, they were greeted warmly. "Mr. and Mrs. Calloway, welcome." A different salesperson practically rushed to assist them. Elena watched as the couple was immediately offered champagne. Guided effortlessly toward the very same Bugatti she'd inquired about, she turned her attention back to Richard. "That seems like a contradiction." Richard's expression barely shifted. "They're long-time clients. We already have their financials on file. I'm sure you understand. It saves time." Elena said nothing, letting the weight of his words settle between them. He didn't just assume she wasn't a serious buyer. He assumed she wasn't worth the time. She could have corrected him in an instant, could have wiped that smug expression off his face by casually dropping her full name, her title, her ownership of the company he was working for. But that wasn't why she was here. She wasn't here to demand respect based on her status. She was here to see what happened when she had none. Without another word, Elena stepped aside, moving toward one of the lounge chairs along the room's perimeter. She didn't storm out. She didn't demand attention. She simply sat, and she watched. She watched as customer after customer was treated with varying levels of enthusiasm, some with warmth, others with polite dismissal, and a pattern began to emerge. White customers, Even those who appeared casually dressed were given immediate and full attention. They were offered brochures, beverages, test drive appointments. Customers of color, they were either ignored or subtly redirected. At one point, another black man entered the showroom. He was dressed sharply, exuding confidence, yet within moments, he was politely but firmly steered toward the lower-end models, suggestions given under guise of finding the perfect fit. Elena didn't need a research team or internal reports. She was witnessing the evidence unfold right in front of her. A system, a policy, a gatekeeping practice that was not accidental, but intentional. She checked her watch. She had been sitting for nearly an hour now, and not once had anyone returned to offer her assistance. She exhaled slowly, then stood up. She had seen enough. Without a word, she turned and walked out of the showroom, stepping back into the bright California sun. She could feel the weight of what she had just uncovered pressing against her chest. But there was no anger, only clarity. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a single bad employee. This was a system. And systems could be dismantled. Elena sat at a corner table in a small cafe across the street from the showroom, stirring a cup of black coffee that had long gone cold. Through the large glass windows, she had a clear view of the dealership's entrance. She hadn't left in frustration. She hadn't stormed out or caused a scene. That wasn't how she operated. Instead, she had chosen to watch. The showroom bustled with movement. Salespeople gliding across the glossy floors with effortless charm. Customers came and went, their interactions forming a pattern Elena could now recognize. It was subtle, but only if you weren't paying attention. She saw how the staff instinctively gravitated toward certain individuals, those who fit their unspoken criteria of an ideal customer. Men in tailored suits, women adorned with designer bags, couples who carried themselves with an air of entitlement. A well-dressed older gentleman strolled in, his navy blazer crisp, his leather shoes polished. Within seconds, a salesman greeted him warmly, leading him toward one of the high-end models. The interaction was seamless, fluid, as if rehearsed. Then a young black man entered. His attire was just as sharp. Tailored slacks, button-up shirt, a confident gait. No one approached him. He lingered near one of the display cars, scanning the interior through the driver's side window. A few moments passed before a salesperson finally walked over. But instead of engaging with enthusiasm, they offered polite yet detached demeanor, their arms crossed over their chest. Elena narrowed her eyes. Even from across the street, she could read the exchange. The salesman wasn't encouraging a sale. He was subtly discouraging one. Then came a couple, white, dressed casually. The man in a polo, the woman in a sundress. They were greeted immediately. The sales team practically competed for their attention. Champagne glasses appeared as if by magic, smiles wide and welcoming. Elena sighed, pressing her fingers against the ceramic rim of her cup. It was a systematic selection process. Customers weren't just being judged, they were being filtered. The doors of the showroom swung open again, and Elena's focus shifted. A young woman, no older than 25, stood near the reception desk, a tablet in hand. Her auburn hair was pulled back into a sleek ponytail, her beige blazer crisp. But Elena could sense something in her posture, something uncertain. Maria Torres. Elena had noticed her earlier, the way she hesitated when Richard Langford gave orders. She had watched how Maria's gaze flickered between the customers and her co-workers, as if she were constantly questioning the very system she worked under. Then came the moment that confirmed Elena's suspicions. A middle-aged black woman entered the showroom, her smile warm as she approached the front desk. Elena could see her speaking with Maria, gesturing toward one of the vehicles. Maria nodded, a clear willingness to help. But before she could take even a step forward, Richard appeared. With a slight tilt of his head, he directed Maria elsewhere. The woman at the desk was left standing alone. Moments later, she turned and walked out, unassisted. Maria hesitated before obeying, but eventually she did. That hesitation was all Elena needed to see. She placed a $20 bill under her cup, grabbed her bag, and crossed the street. Inside the showroom, the energy was much the same as earlier, sleek, calculated, polished. Elena didn't acknowledge Richard this time. She didn't need to. Instead, she walked straight to Maria. The young woman looked up, her fingers tightening around the tablet in her hands. "Hi," Elena said smoothly. "I was hoping you could help me. I'd like to take a closer look at one of the vehicles." Maria hesitated, and Elena saw it again. That internal struggle, the pull between duty and conscience. Maria started, then glanced toward the other side of the room, where Richard was speaking with another salesperson. "Which model were you interested in?" Elena almost smiled. Unlike the others, Maria hadn't dismissed her outright. "The Bugatti Chiron Supersport," she said. Maria's breath hitched slightly, her fingers tightening around her tablet. It's right there." Elena finished for her, nodding toward the prize vehicle displayed under the showroom lights. Maria looked down, shifting uncomfortably. "That particular model is reserved." Elena said, her voice even. "You don't have to do this, Maria." Maria looked up sharply. "Do what?" "Pretend there's a reason I can't see that car, when we both know it's available." For a long moment, Maria didn't speak. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, as if weighing something. Then, just as she seemed ready to say something real, Richard's voice cut through the air. "Maria." Both women turned. Richard approached with measured strides, his presence commanding as he reached them. Elena met his gaze, unbothered. "Is there a problem here?" Richard asked, his tone even but pointed. Maria looked between them, suddenly stiff. "No, sir." "Good," Richard said, then turned his attention to Elena. "As I mentioned earlier, we don't have anything available that would be a good fit for you." The audacity of his words might have made Elena laugh, if the situation weren't so deeply unsettling. Maria's jaw clenched slightly. She looked as though she wanted to say something, but Richard didn't give her the chance. He nodded toward one of the other employees, gesturing for Maria to follow. And just like that, the moment passed. Maria turned, but Elena noticed the way her fingers gripped the tablet tighter, the way her steps weren't entirely steady. It was a small act of defiance, but small was enough. Elena didn't push further. She knew when to step back. Instead, as she turned to leave, she reached into her bag, pulled out a business card, and set it carefully on the polished surface of the desk. Maria caught the motion out of the corner of her eye, her gaze flickering toward it. Elena didn't say anything. She didn't need to, but she made sure Maria could read the words printed on the card before she walked away. "If you ever want to talk, call me." As she exited the showroom and stepped back into the afternoon sun, Elena knew she had done enough for now. The real work was just beginning. Elena Martinez's story is a powerful reminder that real change requires courage. She could have walked away, but instead, she chose to challenge the system, expose the truth, and demand accountability. Sometimes, the biggest victories don't happen in courtrooms or boardrooms. They happen when people refuse to accept injustice as just the way things are. So, what do you think? Would you have fought the same way Elena did? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories like this, because the fight for fairness is far from over.